is very, very critical, that there's a number of issues that we need to be resolving, but where are we aiming and how do we get there? I mean, as we stand here today, the Amazon is burning, Sumatra is burning, Congo is burning, Siberia is burning. We have peatlands that are getting degraded. Our wetlands no longer have water. We have hurricanes. We have floods, droughts. I mean, anywhere that you look, it's almost inevitable that you bump into some environmental disaster, some very in-your-face action that is making us realize how important nature is. And I think I'm actually, this week, as we all very tiredly get to the end of the week, I'm very energized that nature has finally made it onto the agenda, that it is seen as the flip side of climate, that it's not just, as Inga said about climate. Yes, we are on a trajectory to 4 degrees world, and we have to take action to get it to 1.5 degrees. But we are also at the point right now where we're losing species. We've lost 60% of our species in the last 50 years. The IPBES report talks about another 1 million disappearing very soon. So we're looking at all of these, and it's really important for all of us to get behind what that vision is. Where do we want to be? And what we're calling from WWF, and hoping that to work with all of you and get a rallying movement behind this, is a new deal for nature and people. And really, it's about nature and people. It's not nature just for nature, but it is about our survival, the survival of species, the survival of humankind, because these are the kind of natural systems that allow us to live on this planet. So the new deal that we are hoping to get you all behind and to use the super year 2020 to create that vision really focuses on 3 big areas. It's saving our spaces. We have heard about the need for looking at degradation and restoration, but we must start with protection. We have about half our natural environment still intact, and we must protect them, not just through protected areas, but also community-conserved areas, indigenous peoples, looking at the custodians that we know are on the front line of conservation. We must also restore them, because a lot of these are not as intact as we think, and we've heard that restoration of semi-degraded lands is easier than completely degraded lands. So how do you bring those back in? And we must also look at sustainable use, because it's not about stopping production, but it's also to do it in sustainable use systems. So really, we're looking at zero loss of natural habitats as our first goal. The second one is to have zero extinction of species. Of course, we have natural rates of extinction, and we're not trying to meddle with that, but there are a loss of species at an unprecedented rate, from a loss of habitat to demand for wildlife products. There's a range of things that we can do to really protect the species that coexist on this planet with us, and of course, save ourselves. And third, and very important, we're really highlighting the footprint of our production and consumption. The drivers of the loss that we have right now and the need for restoration is coming from systems such as our food system, our infrastructure, our energy system, our extractives. We talk about technology, but these are all driven from metals and minerals that come from the middle of the rainforests, or now from the deep sea, where we're now seeing deep sea mining. So the third goal that we're really wanting to work on is to halve the footprint of production and consumption, and all this by 2030, which is a perfect match to how we look at the decade of ecosystem restoration, because we're looking at the same timelines. So if that's our vision, how do we actually get there? How do we actually make sure that the conventions that we've talked about, the UNFCCC with nature-based solutions for climate now, the CBD, which is really looking at renewing its IG targets next year, the UNCCD, which is looking at restoration, that 350 million hectares that we want by 2030. It will require all of us, really all of us, at an individual level, at an organizational level, and at a meta-global level. So we are looking at what governments can do in terms of the right policies, the right infrastructure, the right incentives, the right subsidies as might be needed. We are also looking at companies, because if we're looking at the causes and what we need to invest to getting our restoration and our ecosystems intact, we need that corporate thing. We need the sectors such as food, agriculture, and infrastructure. We also are looking at investors. We have to mobilize and shift. We've talked about responsible investment principles, responsible banking. And very much so, we're looking at the communities and the indigenous people who are there on the front line, as I mentioned, with the aim of their own habitats, their own, I mean, these are their livelihoods, but also their homes, and how we encourage them and empower them. And last but not the least, we're looking at people, creating a movement. We've all been on the street with the climate march a week ago now, and the most energizing space that we have kind of created recently in terms of getting everyone on the ground to take action. So I'm very delighted to be moderating the next panel, which has representatives from the different stakeholder groups that we need to mobilize. We have an investor banker, we have an indigenous activist, and we have the youth represented here. So I'm going to call on our first speaker to join me here and provide remarks, and then we will follow that with a panel discussion. And we'll start with, where the money is, and I'd like to call on Felipe Zauti, the CEO of Mirova, to please come and share what the banking sector and the investment sector is going to do for us in this decade. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here today. And I'm used to participate usually to panels with investors, bankers, and so it's a little bit different here. And that's good. I mean, it's really very important what you do here. It's to really connect the dots. I mean, and to have together people who are doing different things, but with the same objective. So 2030 vision, I mean, needs huge investments, and so we need to have the private sector and private investors on board to fulfill these investments. What we do at Mirova is very small asset management companies, only 11 billion euros investment, so which is not that big. We have been working the last 4 years with the UNCCD, United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, to build an investment fund and a platform to invest in natural capital. And the investment fund is a land degradation neutrality fund. So the objective is to invest in land restoration, especially in emerging countries. So we have done first investments in Peru, in Bhutan, very soon in Ghana, in Tanzania, and we have already, got, a couple of hundred of million investment from private and public investors. What I would like to outline is the fact that there is a lot of innovation, a lot of technology, a lot of new entrepreneurs, a lot of young people, small and medium enterprises on the ground that need to be financed. It's not only about, development aid or philanthropy. It's about really building a new economic system which has new objective, and we need finance to help this. Impact investing is growing, even if we don't know exactly the definition of it, but it's growing. There is a long way to go. I mean, we need to go from millions to billions, while we know that solving the problems will need to go from billions to trillions. I had the chance to do closing remarks at the PRI, Principle for Responsible Investments, in-person meeting in Paris 2 weeks ago. And what I said that, finance could be a very important and useful tool if we change the way we behave, and especially if we go out of this, shareholder value myth and what has been done, the global roundtables message a couple of weeks ago. I mean, all the big CEOs of the big U.S. firms saying that shareholder value is no more the way to manage companies is very important. It seems to be maybe very far away from what we are discussing here, but it's very connected, in fact. So natural capital is a new space for investors. We need pedagogy, we need research, we need will and ambition to grow it. Biodiversity and land use are clearly not yet on the radar screen of investors because there is a lack of data. We have done a lot of work the last couple of years on climate. Now we must do it on biodiversity as well, measure the impact of biodiversity on the way the companies are run. So we need to work on both sides. I mean, risk and opportunity. Risk meaning avoiding deforestation, meaning measuring the land use, the land and biodiversity footprint company by company, and we need at the same time to work on the opportunity. And the opportunity is to invest in land restoration, in sustainable land use, connecting big corporates, which are really now aware that they have to change the way they manage their supply chain. And of course, to conclude, we have to do it properly. We have to do it in understanding that local communities and the way we work with them are a key first key for success. We have also to avoid land grabbing. This is something very important as far as investment is concerned. We need to provide training. We have to look at employment on the ground. All this is very important. It's again connecting the dots. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to share these views. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felipe. We will build on some of those comments because I think the point that you made about it not being the big aid, but actually being the investment on the ground with the communities where it matters is very important and something I'd be keen to pick up. But let me turn to our next panelist, Alexandria Villaseñor. She's the founder of the U.S. Youth Climate Strike, and I'm sure as a New Yorker she was on the street with us last week, and very excited to hear about where that youth movement is going and how we can all mobilize around it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandria Villaseñor. I'm a 14-year-old climate activist, and I've been on climate strike every Friday for the past 42 weeks in front of the United Nations headquarters here in New York City. But my story begins before I started my climate strike. I was visiting family back in Northern California when the Paradise Fire broke out. And my hometown was very close to Paradise, and since that fire was the worst fire in California's history, it reached 350 AQI, which is Air Quality Index. And at one point, it was the worst air quality in the world. And so since my home was so close, the smoke was seeping into my home, I had to find ways to keep the smoke from coming in. So I rolled up wet towels and put them under windows and doors. And because it was inflaming my asthma so much from that trip, my family had to send me back to New York City early. And at that point, I was very upset because a lot of my friends and family were still in California, still in the effects of the smoke. And so that made me want to really research. And so I started to research wildfires, and that's how I started to see the connection between climate change and California's wildfires and how it's fueling them, making them more intense and all year round. And from that, it made me want to take action and do something. And I didn't really know what to do until after seeing Greta Thunberg speak at COP24. Seeing Greta was so empowering, and she made me feel inspired to come out and strike on December 14th of 2018. And that is when I took my first form of activism. After I started my strike, I got connected with activists all around the world, and we started to plan for the first ever global climate strike that occurred on March 15th. On that day, 1.6 million students in 125 countries went on school strike for climate, demanding action from their world leaders. But that was months ago. This past Friday, on September 20th, over 4 million students in 170 countries went on strike for climate action. Here in New York City, we had 315,000 students shut down the financial district. we were sending a message to our world leaders at the United Nations Climate Action Summit that we want to see them take bold climate action. And of course, after watching the United Nations Climate Summit, all of us had very little faith in our world leaders after decades of inaction. And so that is why, on Monday, September 23rd, myself, Greta Thunberg, and 14 other children from all around the world filed a complaint to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, stating that our rights are being violated by world leaders in action. Right now, children all around the world are experiencing the effects of the climate crisis. Article 6 on the Convention of the Rights of the Child states that children have an inherent right to life. When children are experiencing floods, wildfires, heat waves, hurricanes that are disrupting their lives, then that is threatening their rights as children. And so that is why us 16 children in this complaint are doing it in solidarity with children all around the world. And that is why we want to see more students getting involved and more children going out and taking direct action for our rights and for our future. So when we strike and when we protest and when we make our voices heard, what we do is we fracture the system. Our political systems aren't built to handle these problems. Our system needs to change. I continue striking by thinking about what the future will look like when we win and when we do get system change. So let me share my vision for the future with you. I see a world where human beings live in harmony with the earth, respecting the boundaries of this planet that we call our home. I see a stable climate system where fossil fuels are kept in the ground and their emissions are zero. I see reforestation, ocean cleanup, habitat restoration, an end to pollution, sustainable food systems, and renewable energy. And I know with all of your supports coming out and raising the voices of us children and showing solidarity with us, that we can make this possible. Thank you.
Deliver the vision that was just outlined by Alexandria. But let's hear from one of our Indigenous Peoples activists and very active from Mexico. We have Tania Martinez, who is a researcher as well as looking at how we can get the indigenous voice more clearly heard. And I know you've got special interest in water. So over to you, please.
So I'm going to talk from the perspective as an indigenous person, but also as a researcher, because I think it's important that we start to embrace diversity also in the way we make our science. Climate change poses new challenges for agriculture, not only because agriculture contributes at least in a 20% to the greenhouse gases, but also because it has to deal with more challenges if we want to provide healthy food for all the population. My vision for 2030 is a two approach to restore agriculture and shift the current dominant paradigms by embracing local actions and also increasing awareness and social responsibility from several actors. Embracing local actions and actors means we have to acknowledge that there are other ways or sources of knowledge and technologies that are important to have a sustainable agriculture and healthier and balanced landscapes. For example, let me share with you one of my favorite experiences with an indigenous community back in my home state in Oaxaca, Mexico, who have developed a hybrid systems. They keep their seeds, their native seeds, as they were their children because it's part of their culture and identity. And they have combined it with some modern technologies, or what we call modern technologies, such as irrigation, post-harvest techniques, planting densities, have developed a community-based seed bank, produce organic fertilizers, because at one point they felt their life was threatened. They had moved away from agriculture, but with a climate crisis, that's not possible. They need to be resilient and sovereign, and we need to support initiatives like this one. Another example that highlights how we can include more people, especially those who are usually excluded from these conversations, it's another group of Mayan indigenous women in Guatemala. They started a social project they call Earth Empower in Nutrifuerza that uses an approach like these Oaxacan farmers and have turned it a social enterprise to fight exclusion and create a better life for themselves and for their children. They had to be the leaders promoting these initiatives if they wanted to make a change in their lives. So why is that it's so hard sometimes to look at these different local movements? I think if we really want to make a change and have healthier food systems, we need to embrace these type of initiatives that are struggling many times to get support in the dominant narratives that we have in the world. We need to learn from these experiences that are more concerned with balancing agricultural needs of the community and well-being of local habitants and the environment. Today we are discussing that how we can bring actors together to work towards these goals. And I can provide you an example from my country as well. The Masagro project, the sustainable modernization of traditional agriculture in Mexico, led by the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center and the Mexican Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development. I think one of the basic features of this project is that it has embraced many local actions that were sort of isolated to work together towards a common goal, and also has shown how we can learn, as I was saying, as researchers, as policymakers from these local experiences. The second part I want to build on is accountability of several actors. How many of us think consciously when we go to the supermarket, especially, let me talk about the global north, what is implied with the products we are buying, not only in terms of the environment, but also socially. What are we grabbing from the global south? So I think we need to start acting local and increase collective responsibility and awareness and support many of these initiatives locally. So I think if we embrace diversity in actions and also increase our social awareness and responsibility, we can build sustainable and healthy food systems for the future and for our children.
Thank you, Tanya. Maybe if it's possible, if we could see the results of the Slido, would that be possible? Because it'd be really wonderful to see what all of you think the vision should be, in addition to what we've had our speakers put up. Technology does take some time, so we're all used to it all being instantaneous almost. I'm sure Alexandria thinks it's too long. Well, we can come back to that in a minute, but let me just start the discussion with the panelists here by turning back to you, Felipe, in terms of how you think that the system might work, because you've heard very clear visions coming from the youth and coming from our indigenous peoples. But as the global financial system, how do we act locally? How do we take some of these issues, whether it's agriculture in Mexico and Guatemala, or it's really looking at, what we require from the global system of climate change? How can we get the financial system to respond?
Yeah. The financial system is about but I mean, you know.
Sorry, need to. It's on. I think you're on. You're all right. Okay.
You hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. We need to be to work at the macro level and at the micro level as well. That's the point. I mean, in the financial system, we used to to look at big investments, big corporates. But here we are in face of new economic models, which for most of them have not yet reached the level of maturity that is, needed to attract financial money. So that is a reason why we need to structure now, but we need a lot of people around the table. It's what we call blended finance. So that means that we need public players, philanthropists, private sector, to work together in order to make it happen. Blended finance was a buzzword. During this week, everybody is speaking about this. We need to use public money in order to de-risk projects and then to attract private investors. So of course that's what we need to do. But to be frank, now we have to make it happen. We speak a lot about this, but it's not really yet there. As a private investor, to be frank, today it's very hard to work with public entities. We do not speak the same language. The cost of transaction for really dealing with public entities is very high. When we need, de-risking or junior money or guarantee, we have to speak with dozens of donors all around the world, and it's each time a different topics and different issues. So this is something that we have to deal with to make it more, smoother and so on. Then maybe a last point is that we also need to help these small businesses to grow and to become mature for the and then to be financed by the traditional financing market. This is the reason why we need also to have some technical assistance facility. This is what we have done in land degradation neutrality fund. We have technical assistance facility, which will probably work during months and years to take businesses from the beginning and help them to grow, to be more mature, to integrate, to structure the business, and then to be able to attract more financing.
Thank you. I think you're one of those sectors where the language is quite impenetrable, so I can understand how we might all need translation into your world. Yes. But would it be possible to share an example? Do you have any example that can help us understand what good might look like, so we can visualize how we might scale that up? We started to work on the land degradation neutrality fund 4 years ago. It was the idea of Monique Barbu, the former Secretary General of UNCCD. She wanted to really to partner with the private sector and not to add another UN fund, but also really to have a private-led fund. So we were selected by the UNCCD, and to be frank, we didn't know a clue about this at the beginning, but we thought that what we have done on the energy sector, renewable energy, and carbon fund could be replicated in the sustainable land use, meaning using project finance tools, all our techniques, and apply them to the sustainable land use. At the beginning, when we were selected, we thought that the UNCCD will come with a list of a pipeline of investments, and after a couple of weeks, we discovered that basically there was no pipeline. So we had to work during the last 4 years to build the pipeline, to connect with corporates, big corporates, to NGOs, to promoters on the ground, and to build this. We have struggled a lot to do our first closing. It took 3 years to have everybody on ground to structure the fund. So it's very, very hard because we are a small company, very, very committed. We have been we have launched this company 6 years ago, really to do these sustainable investments. So of course we wanted to do that, but to be frank, a lot of other
players in the industry won't do that, because it's
yeah.
too long. Then we have started to look at the pipelines. We have made our first investment in Peru with a Canadian operator called Ecotierra, and so we provide some loans to between 2,000 and 3,000 farmers, small farm holders in Peru, in order to improve the way the coffee plantation they have, so to replant some degraded coffee plantation, and also to plant new plantation in degraded lands around them. So with always this landscape approach, combining production and conservation around. And also
would you be including the indigenous peoples? Because we heard
absolutely
very, very clearly, and maybe I'll take the opportunity to take to Tanya. You've heard from where the investment might come, but the need for getting these ideas and these projects and this action on the ground is so important. And you spoke very eloquently about the work that you were doing. So could you say a little more about how are you seeing these local enterprises, but also how are you seeing the knowledge that you all have in the indigenous traditions matching the Western knowledge, and how can we get people like us to be as experiential of that indigenous community knowledge as you have?
Yeah. So I think we need to, as I said, we need to embrace diversity. But we need to embrace it in a responsible way, because what we also are seeing is sometimes there's a lot of investment in our territories, and there's a lot of grabbing as well. That's the reason why we also have many people defending their territories, because meaning that we want people to look at us, to invest, to welcome our perspectives, but that also means we need them to respect the way we want to define our ways of living. So I think what I've seen many times is the negotiations are not horizontal. Sometimes the powers are imbalanced, and we need to make a more balance in this power. I'm not saying no to investment, but I'm just saying we need to have a more balanced power when those negotiations come.
Thank you, Tanya. And can you say just a little about, where you might see how we can bring the different ideologies from the Western and the traditional space together?
Well, I think when I say embracing diversity is also at policy making. How many people, or how many indigenous peoples or local people are actively engaged in policy making, at decision making, in making science? Because we also have to consider that there's a mainstream way in which we make also science, and one perspective we have promoted. So I think we start to take into account other voices as well, in several spaces in the end.
Thank you. Alexandria, turning to you, the voice of youth seems to have become the loudest in the recent past, but you're using your voice to get people like the ones in the room and on the stage to create a change that you want. How can we work with the youth, for the youth, in getting your vision that you so clearly outlined?
Yes, so in this past year, the youth climate movement has very much exploded. There is still a lot of students striking, but we still need so many more people out onto the streets to really get the action that we need. So right now, students are taking civil disobedience. We are going out onto the streets every single Friday with that consistent action to keep up that pressure on our world leaders and people in power. And right now, you can see that the youth movement has created a lot of change and change in the conversation. OPEC called the youth movement the #1 threat to the oil industry. And we're already seeing such a change in the conversation. And so what I would really like to see from adults is to amplify students' messages. You guys are able to really support us. You can support us when we're taking direct action. You can advocate for us. You can amplify our message to people in positions of power. And then you can also protect us. We are out onto the streets protesting and taking that civil disobedience, and sometimes without even permission of the police. So we need people's protection, and especially through social media. Students are now getting targeted by a lot of climate deniers and trolls because of how loud our voices have gotten, and now we're threatening their beliefs by just talking about the science. And so the extra protection and barrier between the climate deniers or science deniers and the students.
Thank you for that call of action. We could have this conversation probably all day, but we will be having these conversations in many different forums and different panels throughout the day. And I would just like to summarize by a couple of words that I heard our panelists talk about. I love the fracture the system. I think, we've all kind of tried to fracture the system, but any lever that we can use is great. But then how do you rebuild the system so that people live in harmony with nature? How do you get local expression and local knowledge so that there's power balance, but also a real recognition? And then how do you change how the money works within our global system, not just from an investor perspective, but from a consumer perspective, from how us vote with our wallets. But more than everything, I think we need the right policies, we need the right frameworks, and nothing better to get this all going than the upcoming decade on ecosystem restoration. So please join me in thanking our panelists, and we will move on from there. Thank you.